Wow. Crazy. And
Okay, we ready to roll?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening and thank you for attending the Village of New Paltz Planning Board regular meeting of Tuesday, September 7th, 2021. 7 p.m. We're calling the meeting to order. We have several items on our business agenda that we'll go through quickly. We do have some administrative business, including public comments. We have a public hearing for the site plan and the change of use for PB 2107 Innes Avenue. We have an application review of the site plan for the change of use for PB 2107 Innes Avenue. We also have a site plan review for 17 Cooper Street. We have a site plan pre-application from Woodland Pond, and then we also have a seeker review with the New Paltz Apartments, and we will probably then close some public comments following that as well. So with that in mind, let's get started. So the first order is an administrative business. Did everyone get a chance to, or an opportunity to look at the minutes of August 17th, 2021 from our meeting at that time?
yes.
Do we have any edits or changes that we feel need to be made?
No, not for me.
Okay, then I would like a motion to approve the minutes from the August 17th, 2021 meeting.
So motion.
Request a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the motion is passed. The minutes have been approved. Next, we're going to move on to public comments. A motion here to open the public comments, please.
So motion.
Second.
Second, sorry.
And so the public comments are now open. One thing to note here is that we're going to keep the public comments open until the end of the meeting so that anyone who wishes to make comments online will have the opportunity to do so. Alana as well has shared with me a comment that I would like to read. It is from Mr. Harvey Gregory. It says, greetings, I would like to submit 2 comments related to the Moriello Prod proposal for Route 32 South. 1, a number of people who live in the old cold storage apartments can at times be seen walking to and from the village along the highway. If we're going to have a new housing complex along Route 32, there needs to be a walkway for them along the highway. To encourage residents away from the highway, there should be a walking bike path at the northwest corner of the complex that would connect to the southeast corner of the college property line by the grass soccer field. Number 2, this complex is going to bring a number of cars to the village of New Paltz, like it or not. The Route 32 Main Street intersection is already extremely busy in the afternoon. More cars in the area using Route 32 South is not going to make traffic any easier in the village. My suggestion would be to have Mr. Moriello construct a road just north of the fruit stand, east up over the hill along the edge of the orchard connecting to South Putt Corners Road. This new road would give cars coming into the village on Route 299 and going to the campus, or cars in the Route 32 parking lots and this new complex, leaving school a shorter way to get to Route 299, thus avoiding the Route 32 Main Street intersection. To take additional traffic off of Main Street, visitors to the college could be directed to use this new route. It would be especially useful on the day students return to school when the traffic on Main Street is huge. This road would also take traffic away from the front of the high school. Since this complex is going to bring additional cars to the area, it seems appropriate for the developers to assist the area with traffic. Thanks for considering these 2 ideas. If there are any questions, please feel free to contact me, Harvey G. Gregory, and he gives his address and his email. Appreciate the comment. So we do have the public comments open, and they will stay open. Is there anybody here that has a comment they would like to make on any of the business that was before or is before the board at this moment? Anything from online? No? Okay. So we're going to keep those open, and we're going to move then to item number 3, the public hearing. This is a site plan change of use for PB 2107, 7 Innis Avenue. The applicant is Mountain Laurel Waldorf School. The zoning district is B2. The SBL is 86.34-4-9. In summary, this is an application for a site plan approval to change the use of 2 existing buildings, total of approximately 4,000 square feet, from office to educational, including 2 art studios, on a 0.6 acre parcel located along Innis Avenue in the B2 district. Alana, have they provided all of the appropriate information that you required?
Yes, they have.
Okay. So I would like then, please, a motion to open the public hearing.
So motion.
And a second?
Second.
So the public hearing is now open. Would like anybody here to speak to the issue of the public hearing of the change of use?
They didn't receive anything right there.
Okay, so hearing none, and seeing none, I would then like to get a motion to close the public hearing, please.
So motion.
A second, please.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And the public hearing is closed. We'll be moving now to application review, item number 4, and this is the site plan change of use for PB 2107, 7 Innis Avenue. The applicant is Mountain Laurel Waldorf School. There's no attorney review on this, and this is a returning application for a change of use from an office to educational use. Would you like to join us up here? Now, as we said in the summary, that this is an application for a site plan approval to change the use of 2 existing buildings of a total of approximately 4,000 square feet from office to educational. This includes 2 art studios on a 0.6 acre parcel located along Innis Avenue in the B2 district. This is a type 2 action. The referral to county is exempt per the agreement with the Ulster County Planning Board if the following conditions are met. An increase in parking is not required, which you have stated. Channelized access to state or county roadway exists or is proposed, and new site lighting, if proposed, utilizes the full cutoff luminaries and does not exceed the IEA lighting levels, which I believe that you have stated. So I believe these conditions have been met.
Yes.
Okay. So the next steps are, we've had the public hearing, it is complete. Any new information from anyone? Anything that you wish to weigh in on, even though it's not an attorney review? Very good. Any further discussion by the board?
I think it's a unique property, and there's a rock formation at the back of it, which used to have an incredible variety of small succulent cacti growing all over it. It's not as good as it used to be. There's still some left there, but it's absolutely beautiful. And then there's a really incredibly nice pear tree right near there. And I feel like it's just it's a beautiful place. I don't think it affects anything because you're not really changing the building. I couldn't understand what you meant by carriage house. I went up there and I looked and I, what are you talking about, carriage house? I couldn't see it, but I just I think it would be really nice. It's a really nice place to walk. I mean, I know you're not really maybe supposed to walk back there, but it would be really nice if there was some kind of a path going around by that spot. I mean, of course, the views changed since there was a little tower there. I'm not sure. I was going to ask about that.
Don't remember.
Oh, okay. That's all I have to say. I think it's great. It sort of expands the campus of the school.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that if you're going to have a change of use, that's probably one of the better changes of use. So certainly, I think that's a good way to go for the building, the property. Anything else that we need to look at? No. Okay. In that case, what I would like to do then is I'd like to get a motion to approve the site plan and change of use for PB 2107 Innis Avenue.
So motion to second.
So motion, second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, with that in mind, the motion has been approved for the site plan change of use for PB 2107 Innis Avenue. We do have a resolution here, which I would like to go over. And actually, this is what we're going to be primarily actually voting on. So the resolution of site plan change of use approval, 7 Innis Avenue, Planning Board application PB 2107, date September 7, 2021. It is resolution number PB 2107. Whereas on or about July 29, 2021, Mr. Mark Bernstein applied for site plan approval for a change of use for 7 Innis Avenue to change the use of an existing structure on site from office professional to educational. Following our significant plans and other submittals that formed in part the basis for the planning board's action in this manner, the Village of New Paltz site plan COU application submitted by Mr. Mark Bernstein, the site plan dated July 10, 2021, submitted by Alfondre Architecture. Whereas the proposed project is located in the B2 zoning district and requires site plan approval. And whereas the applicant submitted a short environmental assessment form dated July 12, 2021. And whereas on August 17, 2021, the planning board determined that the application was administratively complete. And whereas it was determined that a referral to the UCPB pursuant to section 239M of the general municipal law was not required. And whereas on August 17, 2021, the planning board classified the action as a type 2 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And whereas a duly noticed public hearing on the application was held on September 7th in person and via live stream, at which all those wishing to be heard were given the opportunity to speak. And now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the Village of New Paltz Planning Board that the proposed site plan COU application for 7 Innis Avenue to change the use of an existing structure on site from office professional to educational as shown on the site plan dated July 10, 2021 is hereby approved, subject to the following conditions. The village's right to enter upon the property for purpose of inspecting. And 2, payment of all fees and final site plan as submitted. So I'd like to get a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So you have now gotten this. It was moved by very good. So it has been approved, and if you'll just get with Alana on the remaining items that need to be covered. Here we are. Already signed and ready to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the next item is PB 2108, 17 Cooper Street, applicant David Toder. Go ahead and please step up here, please.
Good evening. How are you?
Good, and you?
Good, thank you.
So this is a type 2 action. It's a new application that involves a project that was approved last year for the construction of a residential home. The applicant wanted their deck to be larger during construction, and due to the size needs to return to the planning board for an amendment to the site plan. Should the board want, a public hearing can be set. So let's go through this initially here and have a look. So this is a type 2 action. The referral is required, and we will need to set a public hearing. So my question to you is, given that you had all the approvals, why make a change?
Well, they wanted the deck to be a little larger. They expanded it towards the center of the site.
Mhm.
And these things happen during construction. You see, actually, we should make it a little bigger.
Okay.
Terrific. So that, so the deck is larger, and then they also, the the entryway between the garage and the main house, that has expanded also, staying within the space between the two buildings. Also a minor change for public impact.
Okay.
So they're two fairly small changes. We hope you would see that similarly.
We do, but it does require that we get a change to the site plan based upon the size of the deck and how it sits now within the property.
So this is kind of on that island, right? In the neighborhood, there's kind of like that big
Mhm.
Yes.
spot in the middle. And so like, there's other parts there, the other houses, those haven't been built yet.
That's
Right.
right. There are 3 empty parcels
Three,
around it.
and then one on the side.
Yes, it's already been built. And then there are existing homes here that just aren't represented in the older neighborhood.
Yeah,
So is this change moving the garage over as well? That's
No,
all.
in fact, it's very hard to show the distinction, but basically this hatched area between the two masses, it now comes a little closer to the front,
I see.
towards the
Okay.
street.
That
Okay,
is
yeah.
1 and 2, okay. Understood.
And you can see that on the floor plans. And that shows you a little clearer than the site plan, that the storage and the entry porch gets a little bigger.
Right.
And it comes a little closer to the street, but it stays within, the line of the garage. So it's entirely still between the two buildings. And if you look at the building elevations, it's really hard to see what changed because, the door came a little closer, but you can't really see anything from the street.
well, it's kind of up on a hill.
Yes, it is. It's on a bit of a knoll.
The only person who'd really be affected would be the neighbor right behind you, and they probably don't care. I guess, I don't know.
Overall, I believe they're a supporter of the project. Yes.
Okay. So looking at these, then the next step that we really need to do is to set a public hearing. And the public hearing will be set for potentially what, 9/21?
If you do the 21st, you have to get everything mailed and posted by Friday.
Is that possible?
It's a 10-day.
Right.
If you can't, then the next one would have to be the 5th. not the 5th.
I think we can have everything posted by
If you
Friday.
think- I know what Jonathan would prefer, but if
That's,
you think you can do it, then it's fine. You just have to be able to do it.
okay.
And then, well, the other thing too is that I'll refer it to the county. They're actually meeting tomorrow, but then they wouldn't meet again until the 6th.
So you can get it to them for their tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
What do they need, 10 days?
Yeah, so like, I mean, you could set the public hearing for the 21st, but then you wouldn't even be able to vote on it until the second meeting in October, because you need to wait to see what they said, which is probably gonna be no county impact, but you still need to wait for what they said.
You just want to wait until,
So, yeah, pushing the public hearing forward does
It
not get us.
doesn't
doesn't really do anything for you.
Why rush?
Yeah, so
We'll
what,
wait for the things to play out.
Okay.
you just wanna set it for, and you could also set it for the second meeting in October and just wrap everything up in October. It's up to you.
Sounds like that would be good.
You want to do the second?
It's up to you.
meeting?
Yeah.
So then the date of the public hearing that is what?
It would be October 19th, is the second meeting in October.
And that's the soonest that action can be had, and we should have everything in place by then.
Yeah, with the response from the county.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the key things we got to wait on is they're meeting, they'll take 10 days. They're meeting tomorrow, so.
So there it is. All right.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
so then I'd like to get a motion to set the public hearing for PB 2108 for 10/19/21.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion's carried. We're going to see you then back on 10/19/21.
in a while, because this is near the town line.
Yeah, I have to send it to the clerk.
So at least 10 days before that, you need to email a copy of the public hearing notice to the town clerk.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. One thing that we do have, just to note, is we do have a site visit consent form. So if you wanted to go up and take a look at it, we do have the approval to do so. But you can just drive around, see just about as much as
Yeah.
actually walking across the little plane there. Okay, so. The next piece of business that we are going to look at is a site plan pre-application for 100 Woodland Pond Circle. The applicant Woodland Pond zoning district is PBR1. This is a pre-application. No attorney review at this moment, as this is a new. This is a new pre-application for some cottages being proposed at Woodland Pond. Preliminary discussion, not a full application. No motions are going to need to be made. As I understand it, from the Woodland Pond Senior Assisted Living Facility, constructing 3 new single-story duplex cottages. Is that correct? Yes, please come up and have a seat. No, I'm sorry, I've not met the two of you.
I'm Michelle Gramolia. I'm the CEO at Woodland Pond.
Michelle Grimaldi?
Gramolia.
Grimaldi.
Tom Tango, I'm Director of Plant Operations.
I'm Michael Zeeler. I'm a member of the Woodland Pond Board of Directors.
Okay, thank you for being here.
Sure.
So what we're going to do is go through this with you. And as we move forward, I am going to ask that we have an attorney review involved in this as we move forward in this process. All right, what do you got?
So we've got a lot of interest in our cottages at Woodland Pond and a very lengthy growing wait list. So, you know, we've been open for 12 years and the cottages have become exceedingly popular. So we've got, you know, the 84 acres at Woodland Pond. Most of it is not buildable. That's not developed currently because we have a significant conservation easement and then federally protected wetlands. But we did have Chazen Engineering, who did our original site plan and engineering, come in and assess on the remaining existing available property, where could we fit in just a couple of more structures to potentially add a little bit of density of cottages to help work down our waiting list. So if you're looking at the map, you can see there's 3 buildings in red. There are 2 properties, 2 additional structures on the southern side of the property and 1 to the north. And that is what we are contemplating proceeding with construction on, if everything ends up making sense.
Are you gonna have to, I mean, I noticed the one that's, I guess, directionally, I guess the southern end, the southernmost, the 2 cottages.
Mhm.
I know that's a steep slope right there. In fact, that's where the path goes down to the lake
Right.
or pond or whatever. So are you planning to just cut and fill there or level that off, or how is that gonna be situated?
These were when we preliminarily had Chazen come in, they actually identified a few other spots on the campus that potentially could fit a cottage, but they were going to require significant more grading and fill.
Mhm.
These were the 3 that were deemed the easiest to just do some grading, some maybe minor fill, and then get these pieces onto. So yes, it would have to be sort of cut into that hillside there. Because of course you need a level building. And
Right.
access would come, we would have to build access from that secondary access road to the left of the road if you're going down the road, that path.
So the path down to the pond would remain where it is,
Yes,
and this would be on the other side of it,
yes.
and you would fill in that slope right there in order to accommodate it. And I guess you have to do the same thing on the other side too, because that's a steep slope.
No, it's
isn't it?
not on the other side.
Where the parking lot is,
Yeah, no, that one is actually on very level ground.
the one on the north side,
Yeah,
really?
it is. Yeah, it does drop off to the
A little bit
north
further,
and to the
okay.
east, but we specifically were able to site that one away from any of the wetter lower areas. And so,
And even where that southern one is, it's not as, the drop isn't as dramatic as
The
it
road.
is a few feet up. There is a sizable area that's fairly flat, but
yeah, what we don't have here is topos, and you would have that
Right.
in the formal application. So you could determine better if that was an issue. And we can also provide photographs of the sites. So you get a good idea of what that looks like.
And so to be clear, you want to build all three of these additional condos.
Correct.
Well, it's 6.
Yes, up. the
Yeah, it's three duplexes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did eliminate a couple of other alternatives from consideration just because of the significance that would be required for grading and things like that.
So are we gonna be given permission to be on the site? Because I know in the original iteration of this, I wasn't granted permission, and when I did notice things weren't right, instead of repairing them, they just installed a camera.
So that was during the original construction?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Totally different cast of characters, you're welcome.
Okay.
So if there's a piece of paper, I noticed there was a consent form
Alana,
to be
make sure you
signed.
get that, sir, please.
I'm absolutely fine with that.
Okay,
We would encourage it, because if you identify concerns, we'd rather know about them sooner than later,
Mhm.
because we're very much in the exploratory phase right now.
okay.
And you could either come solo, or if you'd like to let us know, we can tour you, whatever you'd like to do.
Well, originally, I had asked to be on the inspection with the DEC. And I had asked for permission for that, and I thought I was going to get it, but then when I got there, they made me sit in the trailer. And they noticed if there were some significant discrepancies. I mean, I can give you a list if you want.
Oh, I take your word for
This
it.
is from,
This is when the
Yeah,
original
We're,
was, yeah,
like I said, you're welcome. If you
so,
have that from me, you've got it from the charitable
So
board.
you might be talking about two different things, Rachel.
well, there were 3 different occasions.
No, let me just finish for a second.
Sure.
If you're talking about a site visit during the application review process, that's fine.
Yes,
And standard. If you're talking about being present during the construction of these cottages, should Woodland Pond get approval? Because that sounds like what you're talking about.
well,
Because if
actually,
there was a trailer on the site, that would have been post-approval. Because there wasn't any DEC trailer on the site.
no,
prior
no,
to
I
approval.
wanted to be on the DEC inspection when they went to inspect the site. I wanted to
Okay.
come with the person from the DEC, and they were fine with it.
Yeah, well,
But, and I had asked you, in fact, for.
Okay, so let's,
I'm not- anyway, I think this is it's a completely different sort of scale of what's.
Oh,
being
I
asked
know.
here.
I know,
It's-
but I just
it's
had
3
these
cottages on a,
strong memories.
3
Right.
duplexes on a developed site as opposed to
The
the
entire,
entire project on an
leveling of a-
undeveloped site.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other observations we need to make regarding this? Zach, anything?
one more question is the corner of this cottage here, is this 25 feet from the easement line or from the actual the wetland boundary?
It's 25
feet from the easement? Okay. It's a little unclear on this, but
to get clarity on that.
they're noting here 25 feet clear distance.
The easement line and the wetland are basically touching each other, they're very, very close, as you can see in that image, so it may be the same point. But our goal is to bring this as far from the wetland edge and still have the offset in the front as possible.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
And the exact design, exact layout of each thing is still.
We haven't had, we certainly not engaged an architect or anything, this is really just the first time that we're looking at it in our meetings. And this presently also contemplates the same footprint and floor plan as our existing cottages. We could modify them if it means providing additional, access to the easement if needed.
Or could you do like a split level kind of thing, so you didn't have to flatten?
It wouldn't really be
Probably not.
practical for our residents, they really can't.
Oh, they can't climb the stairs.
Well, I mean, some can, but it's hard to think about that long term. So we prefer to keep it on a single level.
So the easement line won't change, but I just want to be clear for you all, the cottages as drawn here are superimposed onto a much older site plan. So these wetlands have not been delineated since, for 12 years.
Probably
Yeah.
closer to 2005. So that would be a process that we would.
So
go
if
through.
if you all deem that we need to delineate this particular wetland because of the proximity of the proposed duplex, then you'll need to let us know that when we submit, if we go ahead and submit a full application. So, but the objective was to try to stay away. So we don't know if the wetland has expanded or contracted, and so we don't know exactly. The easement line itself won't change, but the wetland they will have. So
There's a big detention pond. I don't know how that's,
well, that's not up there. That's not.
it's just at the bottom of that hill,
It is at the bottom.
this one.
Yes, that's true.
That won't be impacted by this.
But none of that should be impacted by these particular locations. So.
Okay,
I have a few questions for you all.
would please?
So I noticed that there's some fairly recent code for stormwater, chapter 165. And it indicates, I guess it was submitted in June of this year. I'm just wondering if you can tell us how that might potentially impact our application.
Not at this time. I'll have to review that.
Okay. Also, can you give us any indication of how this is likely to be typed under seeker?
Again, we're gonna need to review it and look at the full application.
Okay.
I really don't want to give you an indication now.
All right, I'll just give you the questions and you can consider them later. The third question I have is about the application fee. Under 212.23, I'd like to know how this is going to be classified. It's obviously new construction. I'm assuming it's residential, but given that I'm not sure exactly how a life care community is defined. And in addition, it might fall under amended site plan, which says that we would have to pay a quarter of the original fee. And I'd just like to know, I don't know what that number was, but based on my recollection, it was probably quite substantial, although a lot of it may have been under seeker. So I'd like to know about that. Also, based on seeker.
What's that?
Corey's
gonna handle
Yeah,
it.
we-
Yeah, no, I understand. Also, I possibly, if you could just let us know whether this will need to go to county. And the final question I have has to do with the parkland fees and parkland donation. This is in addition of a maximum 12 residents, which is about probably 6% of increase in the population of the community, and was wondering whether the existing parkland and amenities that are provided on site for residents would be sufficient, or if you feel that something else has to be done. So those are the 6 questions I have.
Okay, do me a favor, if you would please send me an email with those exact questions on it so that I can forward that to
Sure.
Corey and allow Corey to look at it, and then we can have some conversation between he and I, and attorney,
Yep.
so that we'll be able to give you a better indication of exactly what you will need to do
Okay, Yep.
on all of those items.
all right, I'll do that, and then if these, if there are any additional questions, I'll include those.
So you can get that to us, the faster we'll be able to get it back.
And I'll have it to you tomorrow.
Okay.
All right,
Anything else?
no,
Okay, we appreciate your time. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming
thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
We'll get those emails
Thank you
from you.
very
We'll take a look
much.
at the information, get that to Corey, and hopefully we'll be able to get information back to you on a timely basis.
thank you, John.
So the other guys aren't here.
Yes, just a moment here.
Who like Mike? Mike actually just called in. So Mike Burnett was here.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the review of the New Paltz Apartments, PV 21AX. District is still to be decided. We have an attorney review on this one. Our attorney has provided board members with a clean copy of the scoping document. At this time, really what I'd like to do is, for our benefit and for the benefit of some people that may be paying attention to this, is to provide you with an idea of the point of the scoping document. The scoping document, and Rick, feel free to correct me if I misstate something. The scoping document is providing the scope of the information and materials that they need to look at, investigate, and research prior to providing us with a draft environmental impact statement. So we're not making any approvals tonight of they can construct anything, they can move forward with whatever they need to move forward with. What we're trying to do is to go through this scoping document and look at each of the categories. And if there are amendments and edits that you believe need to be made to the document, now's the time, because we want to give them a comprehensive list of things that we want them to review and look at. So I did speak, or I did email with a couple of our consultants, and they stated to me that they believe that the scoping document accurately reflects the things that they wanted to study. Now, we did have a red line copy, which was provided by our attorney. The red line copy takes the comments from the public scoping session. It takes the comments and suggestions from the consultants. It takes the comments and suggestions that we have had so far, and it has compiled them into one document. This document is fairly detailed, even though it may seem general to some sense. It's fairly detailed in what we want them to study and look at. I personally have some other things that I want them to look at, that I want to be included. I'm sure each of you do as well. And the purpose of the meeting tonight is for us to review this, to go through this very carefully, because once we tell them, or once we approve, then they're going to begin their research to create a draft environmental statement. And once that is done, we really can't, let's just say it's improper for us to go back and ask them to study something else once they have already completed the study. So we need to get that now. And it's unfortunate that we've not gotten any more comment from the public in regards to exactly what they want, and a greater number of people from the public to participate in this. But we're going to have to take that onus on ourselves to represent them in that sense. So, Rick, do you want to give us a quick summary, as quick as you can, given the depth of this document on the document, and then we'll start going through it piece by piece.
I'm confused about which is the most recent one that I should be looking at.
You should be looking at the clean copy.
This,
It's August 18th.
is it the one, it's not the one that came in with our list here, right?
On the front page, it says.
Yeah, so if
August
you
18th.
click that link, that will open the Google Drive and that will,
No,
that contains.
that's the most recent one.
Yeah, so you're gonna go in there. And you're gonna go in the draft scope and public sessions folder. And then you're gonna go into this one.
Okay, that's the most recent one.
Yeah, and so you'll see clean, it's labeled clean and it's dated August 18th. That's something to do.
Which one's that
So-
clean?
It's easier if you have the.
Oh, I'm seeing.
Yeah,
See,
it's on
this is PDE red line clean,
Right, so just
the
this
top
one.
one. Okay.
This has some additional comments from the PDE consultant.
Did you wanna look at that one that has the Provident Design Engineering on it, or just the clean one that?
I think we should just go with the clean one as opposed to going through the red line and then Provident as well. Provident was added to the clean,
They
is that
added
correct?
it to what Rick had already submitted, I think, right? Because they
No.
submitted on the 25th, so they must have, I don't know if they had looked at your comments already. Carlito's on the call though, he can probably just clear that up.
Yeah, I thought Carlito was fine with what we had provided, but Carlito, you can respond.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So we were generally okay with the most recent version submitted. We just noted they identified time periods that they're going to do traffic counts. And we just suggested that they may want to extend those time periods to make sure that they capture the peak hours. Because especially in the AM, they were somewhat confined. It was only 7:30 AM to 9 AM. So if their counts show that the peak hour is 8 AM to 9 AM, then we don't know if it actually extended beyond 9 AM. So we would typically suggest doing 6:30 to 9:30 AM. And then the PM, they stopped it at 6 PM. We would typically recommend going to 6:30 PM. Ultimately, that's, I think kind of a risk that the applicant would be taking on, so that if they didn't get the peak hour in their counts, then they have to spend the money to go back out and do more counts. So, our typical experience is go out, if you're going out to get the data, get the extra hour or half hour to make sure that you're getting all the data you need.
Carlito, when you were talking about changing this, I want to make sure that we capture where you're talking about. Are you talking about on page 25 of this scope?
Yeah, so the item 2 on page 25, where they say existing traffic conditions will be documented for the weekday AM and PM peak hours from historical data and by conducting turning movement manual counts at the following intersections near the project site. Then they say 7:30 AM to 9 AM. Our recommendation would be that should be 6:30 AM to 9:30 AM. And 2:30 PM to 6 PM, we recommend extending that to 6:30 PM.
It's just so that it's clear, when you say their proposal, this was actually modified from what this document does is include everyone's comments, including the consultant's comments up to that point in time. So this is their proposed scope plus the modifications by all of the input by the public, the consultants, town planning board, and village planning. But that's easily done, and we can certainly change that to 6:30, 9:30, and 2:30 to 6:30. Is there anything else, Carlito, that you had that ought to
No.
be changed?
So just so I can make sure my notes are accurate, 6:30 to 9:30 AM.
Weekdays.
And this is in his PD
Yeah,
Right.
red line. So
Right. I'm just trying to get it all into one copy so I don't have to bounce back and forth.
Sure.
And the 2:30 to when, I'm sorry?
6:30
6:30.
weekdays, and you're fine, Carlito, with 11 AM to 5 PM on weekends?
Yeah, I think that's a very comprehensive time period that it's going to capture the peak.
Okay,
Of traffic from the campus to the to the village, I would say the peak times would be 11 PM on the weekends, probably 11 PM to midnight heading towards town, and then 3:30 AM to 4 AM heading back to the campus.
Right. What we talked about, and I think this was at the board meeting prior to the public scoping session, is that it's a combination of when the project would be generating peak traffic versus when the background traffic on the roadways are highest. And that's when you're going to see your greatest incremental impact. So it's really a matter of capturing when the volumes on the roadways are highest, because when there's overnight hours, the capacity on the roadways is available to be utilized. So it's really a combination of when do you have that peak AM, peak PM commuter period, and that peak weekday shopper hour period, or visitor tourist period, combined with when this new project is going to be putting other traffic out onto the roadway.
Okay, so that, just to sort of summarize where we are, the document before you is the applicant's draft scope with all the modifications suggested by the public, the two planning boards, and the consultants. And now with some modifications to that from Carlito. What needs to be done now is a couple of, and John alluded to this, sort of pinch points of decision making. When you finally approve the project, you approve the project. If something comes up afterwards, you don't necessarily get to redo the whole project, except under rare circumstances. And so here, this is one of those pinch points. This is where you are identifying for the applicant what needs to be studied in the environmental impact statement, both the draft and the final finding statement. So this is very important. Under rare circumstances, you might be able to add some things later on that have to be studied after the DEIS, but it typically requires that there be changed circumstances for that to happen. It's not simply, oh, I forgot to talk about it or identify it earlier. Because otherwise, there'd really be no end to this process. And the DEC regulations are very clear that they want a very regimented and forward-moving path for the seeker review. So your job now is to finalize the scope for them to use. They've provided a draft. There are comments that have been made that have been incorporated into this draft. If you're fully fine with this, as Carlito's method modifications, then that's fine, and you vote to approve the final scope. If in fact you have additional changes, as John said, now is the time to make those changes, and then you go ahead and finalize the scope and set them on their way. And what happens once you finalize the scope, whatever changes have to be made to this document, I will make on behalf of the planning board and send to the applicant, as well as obviously file with the planning board and send to the involved agencies the actual final scope for the project. The applicant then sets out to go ahead and study all of those things that you've asked them to study and come up with mitigation measures, some of which you have suggested as potential mitigation measures in this. And they will come back with a DEIS, a draft environmental impact statement. It's a very important document. There's also no deadline for the applicant to send that back. They've been working on it all along. I've seen applicants that come back in a month and they have their DEIS ready because they've been working on it for 3 months. Other times it takes much longer than that. I've seen DEISs last more than a year before the applicant comes back with the DEIS. But typically it's a number of months. I would say anywhere from 3 to 6 is pretty typical. But yours is a very detailed scope, so it may take a little bit longer. But however long it takes, there's no deadline in the seeker regulations for them to come back and provide you with a draft environmental impact statement. Once they do that, there's a whole other process as to you determining whether or not it's been responsive to the scope And then you'd be setting a public hearing for people to comment on the DEIS. And then the responses to those comments come in the form of FEIS, and then the final document is a finding statement by you, which summarizes all of the potential impacts and what are the mitigation measures, and whether or not they have mitigated the project impact to the greatest extent practical. So that in a nutshell is what now remains in the secret process.
Thank
And
you.
I'll answer any questions.
Okay.
One question. So this revised scope incorporating all comments was just finished on August 18th, August 20th.
August 18th.
So it's been available for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, plus or minus. And is it available to the public right now?
Yeah, not at this point in time.
That one?
Well, you put it on the
Yeah,
the website, but it hasn't been published, and there's no provision in the secret regs for the public to have another opportunity to comment on it. They've had their opportunity, and that's what's been incorporated. Now, this planning board also has the ability to say, well, yes, these comments were made, we don't think that those need to be studied. Or that the ones that people ask for, maybe there's some additional ones that might be studied. So it's up to you now to modify it however you want. But there's not going to be another round of public input on this. This now is your responsibility as lead agency to go ahead and finalize. And there are some things, the applicant has some suggestions as to why they want to change that. I've sent that around to the planning board as to my response. Certainly one of those items I think is very well taken, that there's a provision there talking about a reference document from the DEC. That's not really something that they ought to study. That's just a reference document they can use. So it ought to be taken out of a mitigation measure. And also things like, one of the ones that the applicant took issue with was studying on-site use of energy generation, such as solar and wind farms. Certainly, solar is pretty typical for them to go ahead and do. I'm not sure that it makes sense for you to ask them to study wind farms on a project of this size. But those are the types of issues that you have to deal with. You certainly want to hear from the applicant tonight to see what they have to say, and then you make your decision. This is your document, the scoping document that they have to follow.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I noticed that whole section was pretty much crossed out
Which holds.
about all alternative energy use on the site.
Crossed out by whom?
Well, let's do this.
Red line.
Let's
Okay.
start. Let's
Through it.
let's start with the at the top of the document, and let's kind of work our way through this so that we can perhaps approach these in a more methodical manner than to randomly toss some of the questions out. So beginning at the number one, the site location description of the proposed action, all seems very accurate. I don't see that there's anything that needs to be changed on that. Item two, the state environmental quality review process. Project classification, lead agency designation seems good. It does talk about the purpose of the scoping process down here, which I think is important that everyone understand what the purpose is, and then the objections, just so that you understand. And we can, of course, discuss this, but these are what are listed within the document, the government document on this. To identify, confirm the potentiality for significant environmental issues, identify limits or extent of the DEIS, identify extent, quality, and method of presenting existing information, required new information needed to adequately address impacts, identify potential mitigation measures, which is important, identify information or data to be included in an appendix, which we can then use as a reference, identify the range of reasonable alternatives to be addressed, and eliminate irrelevant or insignificant issues and the reason why those issues were not included in the final scope. So that gives you an idea. It goes on to talk about how they submitted the draft scoping document to the Village of New Falls and how it was revised. It then talks about in 2.3, the seeker review agencies. It gives you a list of the involved agencies. And then it gives you as well the interested agencies. And then members of the public. And then it talks about the content of the DEIS, table of contents, and then what the executive summary will include. Now, the executive summary is important, but it's not something that we should completely rely on. It's going to be a brief, more general description of things as opposed to the details. It gives you then a format of how they can lay out the DEIS.
Right,
So,
I found a typo, do you want me to just fix it?
Or you can just let me know what it is.
On C, you wrote, just says things instead of signs.
Where is this? Okay.
Under 3.3, it's on page.
Oh, yeah.
2 point, I'm sorry, which one?
It's 3.3, the executive summary, letter C, landscaping, lighting,
Last line.
says things
Ah,
instead of signs.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay. Then goes on to talk about the format, how they're going to work at it. Short-term, long-term impacts, cumulative impacts, associated environmental impacts. And then it goes down and talks about impacts of the proposed action on the use and conservation of energy, which is something that we just briefly addressed. Solid waste management, public acquisition of land. Solid waste management does not include the wastewater management, but that's described a little later on. So do we need to include that the format, and including not only
What this is setting forth is simply the minimum that should be done. As it says, the format of the DEIS at the beginning of this format may be flexible, however, all DEIS
must include the
following,
okay?
right? But it actually includes much more.
Then a description of the proposed action, the location, the use, total project area, including proposed impervious surface areas, including roofs, driveways, roads, etc., including the widening along New York State Route 32 south contiguous to the site as applicable, which is, I think, important. Disturbed utility areas, description of natural areas and areas of the site to remain undisturbed. And here it does include stormwater management and drainage plans. The structures that are going to be needed, the site access, vehicular and pedestrian circulation and parking. Description of bicycle lanes and access. And further down, we can specify, and then they do address the need for bike lanes to be studied, not only existing bike lanes.
So there was something there about waste management?
Yes,
like
and there is,
recycling.
in the general sense that yes, the solid waste management, and they'll get into the detail of what the solid waste management is to include.
The beginning of this
It's just
is
all,
really just setting everything up generally as to what should be required. Once you get to 3.7 and beyond is when you really get to the nuts.
right.
Involved of this, the guts of what you're doing.
But this does describe, just so you understand, it does have things such as utilities that they're going to be describing which utilities are going to be using. And then it goes on to the operation and maintenance of the project, who is going to own it, who's going to develop it, what the management office is going to look like. Then it gets into the permits and approvals required. And that is something of which we're part of. You do notice there that on the wetlands permit, the town of New Paltz Planning Board and wetlands inspector will also be involved. Just talk about the county and then the state, including the wetlands delineation, water supply and treatment improvements, and then down to the project purpose for need and benefit. And then they get into 3.6, the environmental setting and existing conditions of the project site. So as Rick was saying, then we start getting into very detailed. So You notice that it does have not only the general topographic setting, but it does have wetland delineation, existing terrestrial ecology, including any endangered, threatened, or special concern species, and habitat assessment. And as it gets farther down there, there are some, it does note some items, in particular the bald eagles that is there in that area. And it does go on, and at that point, we can then request that it look for other things as well.
But not now.
This should, right now, no, these are just setting up the
The
conditions.
3.6 is just saying, what are the existing conditions at the site? Again, it's more prefatory in nature, it's describing it. I mean, it's important for you to understand what impacts there are and context of it. But it's still sort of setting up the project. 3.7 and beyond is when you say, all right, these are the potential significant adverse impacts that we see. This is what we want you to study, and these are the potential impacts that we want you to consider. I mean, potential mitigation measures that we want you to consider.
I just wanted to be sure there was some like baseline
Mhm.
testing of the pre-existing conditions of the water.
That's something that certainly we can address a little farther down when we do start getting into the water and to the wetlands and the hydrology. So starting at 3.7 says this section shall provide a detailed discussion of the known and anticipated adverse environmental impacts of this project, the severity of the impact, and practical mitigation measures designed to avoid, minimize, or offset the impact. Unavoidable adverse environmental impacts and irreversible commitment of resources and alternatives, including the mandatory no-built alternative.
And if you think back, just so you can understand the context of this, what they're lifting this from is the environmental assessment form. And your discussion in part 2 of that environmental assessment form is to what you consider to be of concern. So if there are things in there that you didn't think were applicable, they're not going to be included. But you know, this is a continuum of the process. And so what they're being asked to do here is to study those things that you addressed in the EAF part 2 as things of concern.
So looking then at the existing conditions, it talks about the impact of land, the existing conditions, and then the potential impacts. Among these are they were going to quantify the slope disturbances by category, phasing the schedule and methods to limit the area of disturbed soils, going to discuss the impact and removal of vegetation and topsoil on habitat, soil erosion and sediment control measures, and those will have to conform with the New York State DEC standards. Discuss the proposed grading plan for the project and estimate proposed cut and fill earthwork volumes. The number of truck trips associated with import-export activities to be estimated, and the anticipated routing of such truck trips shall be identified. And they're going to discuss the truck trip timing and traffic control. My question, of course, is this going to be direct to the bypass route and up Putt Corners, or is this going to be going south through the southwest through the bypass and then over to 19 and then 299 and then excuse me, over to 19 and then North Chestnut? And then to discuss the need for any retaining walls, potential mitigation measures.
John,
Yes,
just to answer your question, the topic that we're in right now are the impacts on the land itself.
right,
What's happening to the land.
right.
Later on, we talk about impacts on transportation.
Okay,
Get to other issues dealing with traffic. So if it's somehow not included in either one of those, then yes, we need to revisit this and decide what you want.
okay,
But the impacts on traffic and what they're going to study with respect to traffic is later on, again, everything in this, the guts of this thing is 3.7 series, and the impacts on transportation is 3.7.6. Right
Okay.
now, we're talking about on the land itself, which is 3.7.
Okay, thank you. So continuing then, potential mitigation measures, elements of the project design, site layout, impacts to mature vegetation. And then again, talks more about different mitigation measures, mitigation that we propose for identified adverse environmental impacts as necessary. And how they're going to mark the construction areas. And that all the disturbed areas should be stabilized and all soil and sediment control measures must be removed. Then moving to 3.72, impact on surface water and ground water. And it then identifies the existing conditions, including mapping and field delineated and agency verified, and if applicable, locally designated wetlands and buffer areas using the Ulster County mapper and the New Paltz Natural Resources Inventory. Are there other mappings for, okay, it says the New York State DEC, ACOE, okay, got it. Location and description of existing wells on site. Now, would this be the opportunity to discuss about measuring those wells, baseline levels, or would that be later on?
Well, first of all, the applicant is not, we're asking the applicant here that if you're going to be using on-site wells, you need to be doing certain things. They are representing, and they will likely set forth in the DEIS, that they are not using any on-site wells.
Okay.
Right? But we don't, they had asked to remove that. I don't want it removed. I want them to address that in the DEIS, so it's part of the record. And in fact, they may decide that in their negotiations with the village, they may utilize some on-site wells to help supplement the village system. I don't know that, but that's always a possibility of larger development. And so there are provisions in here that if in fact they're going to use on-site wells, then they need to be studying certain things. But if they're not going to be using on-site wells, then they don't have to be studying things.
Got it. Okay. Then moving forward here, it does say describe the depth to the water table, which is something I know you were interested in. Temporary impacts to surface water due to construction and the process for snow and ice removal and location of snow storage both during and post construction. The potential impacts are then discussed. Potential impacts associated with any wetland or wetland buffer disturbance. Impacts to wetland buffer protections due to rezoning. Potential impacts from future drainage patterns. They're going to discuss the stormwater pollution prevention plan, the SWIP, the preliminary SWIP, which shall include sediment and erosion control plan. The SWIP will be provided as an appendix in the DEIS. So they're going to discuss it, but the actual data for it will be in the appendix. So we'll have that to look at. Number 7, if on-site water supply development is contemplated, identify effects on surrounding wells based on a pump test, including identification of the need for new water supply wells. If the existing sources are inadequate, discuss alternatives for providing water for potable and non-potable uses, including development of adjacent water supplies and or connections or expansion of existing systems. If an on-site water supply development is contemplated, discuss the results of off-site and on-site well and surface water monitoring. So this does approach the issue of on-site water supply. Then they go on to discuss the mitigation measures.
So just to be clear, with the contemplation of the on-site water supplies, this is based on a pump test. If I recall, wasn't there an issue with pump tests affecting people's wells at all? Like I think on Plains Road?
That may have been on Plains Road, but
Right.
it's not here, so I don't really.
No, I know. So I was thinking maybe that should be they should test people's wells before they do the pump test,
Well,
because you want,
what you want to know from the pump test is what is the effect of drawing water out of the proposed wells? What effect will that have on the
Right.
surrounding wells? And then
Right.
that's what they do with part of this testing process.
And can
They
we,
go ahead and they contact each of those neighbors and say, can we
Test.
put monitoring in your wells so that we can
Okay.
decide when we have a 72-hour pump test, what effect, if any, does that have on your wells? And you'd be surprised, sometimes because of the way that water up in this area, unlike say Long Island, that is just one big basin of water underneath, everybody's just putting their straws in there. Here, the water is done through fissures, rock fissures and other things, so
Right.
that one person's house may be not affected at all, and the house right next door might be affected greatly.
right,
That's why they try to go ahead and test many as will give permission. Some people won't give permission for this when they can't test it.
would this be the point where we might want to specify that they include the Hawk Hill neighborhood specifically?
But what happens is that they hire, you were telling them they need to, you don't want to get down to too much detail. There's sort of a balance between too general and too specific. You're telling them that they have to test and study the impact of any on-site wells on surrounding properties. Now, they're hydrologists, and we require it here, that wasn't in the original one, that it be done by a hydrogeologist. And so the hydrogeologist is the one, based upon his or her background, is going to determine what is the potential impacts in trying to test those areas. When you get that back in the DEIS, if that information is something that you or hydrogeologist that you hire says is not adequate because they didn't study the right areas, then they have to go back and do more testing. Whereas if you say exactly what they have to do, then you're sort of excluding the other areas that they don't have to do.
Okay,
I'd rather just tell them they have to generally do with traffic. It's the same kind of thing. You're telling them specifically what to address. But if they address that and some information comes up in the testing that says that maybe something else ought to be tested, you have the ability to then expand
Okay.
that testing.
okay. So by taking a more general approach, it allows us to have the option of being more specific. However, if we took a very
If-
specific approach, we would not be having the option to become more general.
Potentially.
Okay, got it.
You could be very specific, as long as you hit all the specific points, you're
Right.
fine. But that's the danger.
But if we left out something, then we wouldn't have the ability to go back and say, we want you to be more specific.
Depending upon, it's really, depends upon the outcome of the data.
Got it.
There may be
Got it.
something in that data, even if you said, like a traffic, it happens all the time. Probably you can explain it much better than I. But you identify certain traffic intersections that ought to be studied, and trips, and turn lanes, et cetera. And then you may get that data, and that data suggests that some other area ought to have been tested as well, based upon the data that you found. You can then require them to go and now test that new area.
Okay, okay. All right, so moving on then, they then talk about describe administrative issues related to the proposed water systems, such as property ownership, easements, facility ownership, maintenance, and service area boundaries. So this does then include some relatively specific requirements, but again, by keeping it general, we allow ourselves the opportunity to become more granular. Talks about potential mitigation efforts, methods to minimize activity near the wetland resources, which is important. Methods to maintain protections of on-site locally designated wetlands and buffer areas, following the rezoning of the project site from town to village. Then talks about methods to avoid and protect existing wells on or near the site that may be impacted by the project, which is something I think that we just hashed over. And then it talks about the mitigation methods and the methods for wetland and watershed protection where necessary. Then we get into 3.7.3, impact on plants and animals. Now, it does say that the bald eagle is listed as a threatened species by New York State and was identified on the Part 1 FEAF. populated by the mapper, and that a comprehensive endangered and threatened species habitat assessment report shall be prepared by qualified biodiversity professionals familiar with the Hudson Valley. I know that you had discussed, Rachel, that you're looking at endangered woodpecker species.
Red-headed woodpecker. The reason I mention it is because it was identified as a potential species in the pit. So I figured if it's possibly there, then it's probably possibly at the other side as well.
Well, it's likely if it was, it would have shown up in the DEC mapper for this.
Yeah,
I
is
don't
that
think
even,
that it was.
is that even a threatened species?
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, the EAF is what draws on the DEC data and much broader than a particular site. So you put it in a particular site and the DEC data is much broader. So it may be something that's a mile off the site, but it still gets captured by that. So usually if it's not captured by that DEC mapper, it's not something that's of significance for that particular site. But if you have information that the woodpecker is on the site, that you've seen one on there or something like that, then then you can include it.
Okay.
If the board wants to include it, we can include it.
I mean, online, it seems like it is rated as least concern on International Union for Conservation of Nature, red list of endangered species. But wouldn't also this section that's prepared by a qualified biodiversity
Should include
professional,
it, yeah.
they would identify it?
That's what it's supposed to happen. That's why you don't need to identify
Right.
every single one. They have their person go out and they would look at the habitat and they would look at the trees and bushes and other things that might
Right.
habitat.
I hear you.
And they would identify their study that you're asking them to do.
Okay.
You then have the ability to have your own person, and you have an environmental person that's assisting you on this. And they will look at that report and they will critique that report and then advise you as to whether or not that report is accurate.
Okay. Because I know I had some concerns by some people who've approached me regarding specific tree bats that are in the Hudson Valley area that are supposed to be endangered. So
Well, there's a number of them. There's the Indiana bat, and the
Yep.
long.
Indiana.
bat.
red hoary, silver hair, the red, the hoary, the silver haired, and the long nose, long ear rather, excuse me.
Long-eared is, I don't think those other two are endangered under the DEC listing, but in any event.
Okay.
Doesn't
They
help.
should also be discussing, species of concern. This is just endangered species. So they're gonna come up with their habitat report. You have your environmental consultant that's going to look at that. And there'll be general descriptions of certain things. Let's say I'm not saying it's gonna happen. Let's say in their report, they talk about all this hickory bark that's found on the site, but then they say there's no habitat that's suitable for an Indian bat.
Mhm.
Well, those two conflict, and your environmental consultant will say, well, if you have those, then it is a potential for roosting. for
Right.
those, bats.
Well,
So
just,
that's the kind of report back that you would get, and then you can require them to go back and do further study.
I'm sorry, Rachel, you were gonna.
no, I was just gonna say with the bats, they'll just cut all the trees down before they can put new nests in them.
They do have the ability to do that, and the reason they can is because that's a DEC
Right,
mitigation. The DEC recognizes that it's really too much, I guess, is to go ahead and do a bat study on every single property that wants to get developed. And so as long as there are sufficient roosting areas in the general area, if a particular site is going to cut down trees during a time when they're not roosting, when they come back to roost, those trees aren't there, there's sufficient trees around there, they'll roost someplace else. And so it's the DEC that says, even though this is an endangered species, that's the way to mitigate the impact.
Can we request a wildlife census? Would that be part of what our person would have so we know what animals are present.
Well, that's what the assessment report is supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Supposed to assess the habitat, and when they go there, they sometimes see particular types of wildlife and record that, and they put, a lot of times, it's, the most important part is describing the habitat that's there, and then, you know, environmentalists who are trained would know that given that habitat, it will impact certain species, both plankton out.
Okay. So moving on, it talks about how the wish to discuss impacts of the project on the potential loss of existing ecosystems which support protected wildlife habitat, and the potential for the degradation of these natural systems that result in the loss of species. The impacts on wildlife displacement, loss of nesting, breeding, foraging, and overwintering of wildlife, potential for wildlife accommodation on and off the site. So that, I think that's what we're talking about. And then discussion of retention of wildlife travel corridors and interconnectivity with the off-site wildlife travel corridors. Talked about the
That
potential.
has become something that's of particular concern. In fact, the town and some of their proposed critical environmental areas, they highlight the fact that you take away a certain corridor on a particular property may not seem that important. But if you look that in fact it is a well-traveled pathway, then you have to decide what is the impact of that. Now, it may be that it's still okay to do that, similar to bats, if it had another way around there, but it may not be that simple. And so then you have to get into more specific mitigation efforts in order to avoid that impact.
And then discuss the retention of wildlife travel corridors, interconnectivity with off-site wildlife travel corridors. We just said potential mitigation measures. Talks about eliminating the disturbance of plant and animal ecosystems and habitat. And then the groups that they're going to consult with regarding that to determine special conditions of development or permits are required. But then it goes on to talk about agricultural resources. Project is in a designated agricultural district pursuant to the Agriculture and Markets Law. Projects located on farmland of statewide importance as noted in the Ulster County mapper. Is that true, even though they're no longer an active agricultural area?
Well, it's the existing condition, and even if it's not farming, it's still within that district.
Okay. Then one of the things that I think is important here does describe the past use of agricultural chemicals on the site. Which, yes, given that it's an apple orchard, that's probably something important to note. Then potential impacts. Soil impact due to the use of agricultural chemicals on the site. And then it talked about examining on-site treatment of agricultural soils and potential for reuse within the no-build area.
Number 5 is one that was added as a result of someone's comment.
Right, I noticed that, yes, the Taliaferro Farm and Student Micro Farm, that was
I don't know
a field cute.
Actually, several people had brought that up, I think, including Rachel, but some
Yeah.
other people did as well.
They did, Rachel champions that, and yes, that's.
And so the applicant had said that they didn't see a need to do that because of its distance, and therefore there wouldn't be any impact. My response, if you want to stick with it, to them, as I showed you in the email that I sent back to them, is that that's the whole purpose of the DEIS, is to determine whether or not there is an impact of studying it. And if indeed it ends up that there is an impact because of whatever studies that they've done, and the board agrees that they were sufficient, then that's all that has to happen. If it does show that there's some impact, then they would have to try to mitigate that impact.
I mean, I have to say, I kind of agree with them that I think the Taliaferro Farm is not really relevant.
It's pretty far away.
It is pretty far
Micro farm
away.
is right there though.
Yeah, I think that, there could very well be some impacts from the construction or something on the micro farm, so.
You want to then
But-
delete the,
Well,
the
I'll tell you
farm?
something, it's not, as far as the campus go, it's not so much the micro farm, it's the area around it where the students have been studying birds. And I can send you, more information about that, but
What do you want it to be studied?
I guess impact on the area. I'm not sure what to call it.
Is that under more of the wildlife?
Yes,
than
I guess it is
agricultural?
more wildlife and agricultural, yeah. Yeah, but it is, there's an area there where the students have been studying birds. It kind of comes and goes. The way I see it is it's almost like a library, and people aren't always going to be checking out books on red-headed woodpeckers. But if it's preserved, saved, and taken care of, then when another student comes along who's interested in the woodpecker, it'll still be there.
So then back into potential impacts, we might want to request a study of the areas immediately surrounding field Q for bird study.
Yeah,
Okay,
So right now it says that they have to study potential loss of nesting, breeding, foraging, overwintering.
that's good enough.
And potential for wildlife accommodation on and off the site.
Yeah,
You want to say including but not limited to area Q?
yes.
yeah,
Would
not
please.
limited to, yeah.
Is that something that is recognizable, area Q of the campus?
It's called field Q,
Field Q. Pardon me.
and
Yeah,
it's
there
the
we go.
part that
But
it's,
it's on the city campus, part of the city campus?
yes, it is part of the student campus. It's the most southern tip of it. Most southern,
Okay,
I guess,
Right, we'll add
southeastern tip.
now what, going back to the,
The potential
Talio
mitigation,
Farm.
3.7.4, Talio Farrow Farm, do we want to keep it or eliminate it?
Yeah, it looks silly.
I would say, eliminate it.
Okay,
okay, so it's just gonna be on the student microphone on field two. Is that right?
yes,
Yes.
and this is discussing agricultural resources
That's
only.
right.
Then it talks about mitigation efforts on adverse environmental impacts in the area and for the specifically addressing the agricultural areas. And then we move on to impact on aesthetic resources. Talking about visual impacts from where it sits. Having visited the site, I think that we should kind of leave it where it is with those items. As the site itself will actually be sitting down below tree line and actually below ridge line, visible from some of the areas. So it would be interesting to see what the potential impacts are going to be. And moving down there to B and item 2, talks about a narrative, description, and graphic representation. And I don't know how we would be able to get the view of those areas from those areas in question, such as the Shawangunk Mountain Scenic Byway area, Mohawk Reserve.
What they would be doing is they would be hiring someone to go ahead and take pictures and describe the view of this site from these A through F.
Right.
And then they would describe what impact, if any. Now, maybe on some of these, they won't be able to see because of one reason or another. And that's part of their study, and it's part of then your knowledge base. Unless your consultants say that, well, I was up there and I could see it kind of thing, but that doesn't normally happen. So you'll get a report based upon it as to these view sheds, as to whether or not the project can be seen, and therefore it's going to interrupt these important view sheds from these resources, aesthetic resources.
So that's going to be similar to what occurred with the Zero Place when they did the view shed studies.
Yes.
Okay. Then it talks about mitigation efforts for the view shed. one of the aesthetic resources, it says identify the retention of agricultural lands protected by a no-build area. Does that belong in mitigation for view shed?
No, this is an area, this was in there originally, this was not added by any of the consultants or public comments. Or planning. This was there, it's that they came up with.
Okay.
They are retaining some agricultural lands that aren't going to be built. Right, it's not part of what they're developing. And so they're going to, as a potential mitigation area, identify this as a no-build area and restrict it by restricted deed covenant to try to, in balance, mitigate some of the visual impacts this
Okay.
project will have.
Got it.
Adjacent property that's not going to be developed.
Got it. Okay, so now we move on to one of the more detailed items, the impact on transportation, existing conditions. And it talks about doing a transportation impact study. And Mr. Holt, if you want to chime in at any point, feel free. The TIS will be conducted to analyze the movement of people and goods to and from and near the project. Provided as an appendix in the DEIS will include descriptions of the size, capacity, physical condition of the roadways in the study area, included but not limited to, and it gives some different details it's going to do. I know that the Department of Transportation requested certain areas and intersections to be studied. And as I look through here, most of these areas are part of the DOT's request. And then,
A lot of this was added
right,
as a result of Carlito's comments. Both as to existing conditions of trying to describe a lot more roadway, as well as do the potential mitigation measures. etc. So a lot of this, I would say, majority of this has been revised by your traffic consultant, Carlito.
okay. Mr. Holt, does this accurately reflect the additions that and the information that you thought was important?
Yeah, we checked it against our red line comments that we had previously submitted. And our red line comments reflected all the comments that were received by DOT. And we think that this now reflects everything that we feel should be in the scoping document. To Rick's point earlier, traffic is one of those more dynamic aspects where sometimes you don't know the extent of the impacts until you get into the analysis. So you try and be as comprehensive as possible, but there is language in the scoping document that indicates, if the impacts seem to be outside of the study area, then there could be additional analysis that's needed at other locations beyond what's identified herein.
Thank you, Carlito.
Thank you. So do we feel like we need to have any other discussion on that, or?
I think as you can see by this, it takes up a
Great deal.
deal of the number of pages as one indicator as to how detailed the traffic is, because obviously traffic is one of the larger impacts, or at least apparent impacts from this project. And so I think Carlito has been very thorough, and DOT has been involved. So I think that you have a pretty good document at this point in time as to adequately study the traffic impacts and potential mitigation.
Yeah, I thought it looked great to me.
And I noticed that we do have trip distribution patterns should be established for the generated trips. And so I think that's a good point there. Also, the analysis at Main Street, interaction of school driveways with the intersection operations,
And they've included all the other projects that are going to impact the traffic as well,
Right.
which is good. I'm not sure what's the Still building?
The Still,
Yeah, STIHL.
I believe, is an on-campus building.
Oh,
Where is that?
number 4, identify other projects which will generate a substantial volume of traffic through the study area. I think it says other projects, not just the ones they listed, because there are other projects actually.
Oh, project, development project at the Steel building.
I don't know what that is. That was probably a public comment that was included.
Is that on 32, just past the Agway site?
Oh, no, that looks like.
No
it.
idea.
Okay.
No idea what they're talking about.
Or do you want to include it or exclude it?
No, it's included, just we just don't know
Oh,
what it
yeah.
is.
Oh, yeah.
So it'll be
no.
interesting to find out.
But the applicant. did
What the
not
steel building is.
include That particular one, so the applicant may understand also where that is.
It looks like a typo, to be honest.
I'm not sure. Probably Google it.
Page as well.
28,
I'm not finding,
28, number 4.
no, I mean the,
This
on
shall
Google.
include, but,
Well, it's probably much better this time. I think it's speeding.
it'd be hard to Google
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
No, it's a pretty unique spelling.
it doesn't really show.
Still building is that right next to the Outlands?
That's what I was thinking, was
It's right-
the old chainsaw.
Yeah,
Building,
so I feel like the
yeah.
sign is still there. It says still on it. I'm visualizing.
Oh, really?
Right,
So it's
So
along
that-
that
that,
corridor,
like,
that 32
hardware store?
corridor.
yeah, it's like right along that same corridor. It's just that whole, there's like a
Okay.
stretch of buildings like that.
Oh, you're right. It's Tony's Power and Equipment
There
Repair,
you go.
Okay.
88 North Chestnut. It's a Still dealer. I don't know. It must be some kind of power
Yeah,
equipment.
it's a, yeah,
I never heard.
it is.
Something new.
There we go.
That Wildberry project.
Yeah.
Is like, I haven't heard a thing about that. I don't know if Rick said anything about that, but to my knowledge, that's like kind of,
What's on hold? They haven't.
Yeah, you never
withdrawn.
know.
Yeah.
As soon as the dollar signs appear, they'll be.
Yeah, the Wildberry project is out across
But it's a
That's
pending
right at
the
project.
thruway, but it's, yeah,
It's your
It's a
stuff
significant
anyways.
pending
it
project.
It is.
that's
certainly would be.
Theoretically, in the process of doing a draft environmental impact statement,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
has been for several years.
Do
Well,
you think
yeah,
the credit union is big enough to include on
Excuse me?
this? Do you think the credit union project is big enough to include on this? It's kind of far, but
I wouldn't think so.
yeah,
Banks don't have that same kind of intensity
yeah.
that a lot of these other sites do have.
but I'm glad he did put the Trans Hudson project on there.
I think these comments are probably from the town plan.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a pretty comprehensive list here, especially the like multimodal transportation opportunities. Bike and ride share. It says ride hauling opportunities. Does it mean, do you actually mean ride hailing opportunities? On item number B18.
You mean like
I would guess.
Uber
so.
and,
Like Uber and Lyft.
Yeah,
there's no Uber and Lyft in New Paltz. Anyone
True,
who's
but-
tried knows that they don't exist here.
B, potential impact, item number 18, multimodal transportation. It should be ride hailing opportunities.
I would ask Carly.
Yeah, yeah, that's intended to be ride hailing. So Uber or Lyft.
The I and U keys are right next to each other, darn it. Then looking at some of the potential mitigation issues. Again, looks like that's gone through quite a bit. So thank you for that input and appreciate it. All right, moving on to 3.7.7, impacts on energy and utility facilities. It does describe the existing conditions that the sanitary sewer systems describe existing public sewer conveyance and treatment facilities, capacity and current usage. So there is going to be a capacity study then. Using a 3-year summary of flows and loadings from the village. Then looking at the potential impacts, project demands, and then it talks about down here farther reviewing capacity of village wastewater treatment plant and conveyance system, including the addition of anticipated loads from the project.
Does this include anticipated buildings, the way the traffic study did? In other words,
I think it's talking about,
it should if it doesn't, I
I
think.
don't know what you mean.
I mean, they're calculating the added traffic for pending developments. They should do the same thing for the sewage treatment. Right?
They're required to take into consideration actually what happens as a matter of fact when you're dealing with a
Oh, it says.
municipal service of wastewater and water is that the applicant will seek from the municipality providing the service, the so-called will serve letter.
Mhm.
The municipality will not give that if they believe there's a problem doing that, and it's the municipality rather than the applicant who's deciding what are the demands that are present, what are the future demands. And if they're comfortable with all those, they'll give them a will serve letter. If they're not comfortable, they won't give them a will serve letter. And without a will serve letter, the project's dead until unless they can find an alternative like the water and wastewater. And so those are two very essential items for any project development, especially residential.
okay. Then goes on to detail that they're going to describe the proposed water main extension and the proposed wastewater conveyance and treatment systems. And then it does describe down here the will serve shall be provided, including utility service providers' ability and willingness to provide the service to the project. So there is that caveat there. Then goes on to discuss the mitigation measures, including the use of alternative innovative stormwater management techniques to promote the infiltration of stormwater and minimize the generation of surface runoff. Green build techniques and technologies. Potential for carbon footprint reduction, minimization, and associated mechanisms. And then goes through these mitigations proposed for identified adverse environmental impacts as necessary. Then it talks about climate change impacts. And again, that's something that is fairly general, but it does talk about mitigation efforts, including LEED or Energy Star into the design and operation of the buildings.
Sorry, John.
Yes.
Is the consultant who looked at the wastewater on the call, or did we just?
What the?
No.
No, I don't believe they are. No.
Dennis Larry.
Yeah, Dennis-
Dennis said he couldn't.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So, I guess I'll just look at his red line comments and see if there is anything.
Well, he said that he looked at this.
He did look at the final.
This one, in his email today, when John was asking.
Right.
what he was gonna do, He said, I looked at this, and I think he covers all the areas that I was charged with, which was water,
Yeah.
sewer, and some other engineering issues. And he said, it reflects what I believe is necessary, so.
And I did send out some emails asking if this did reflect what they believe should be included in study.
Now,
Just
this-
to,
The climate also includes greenhouse gas emissions. That's why I'm a little bit surprised. Rachel earlier said all this stuff was taken out. I don't know what was taken out.
No, that's not the part, I'm not, there was the
Yeah, go ahead.
one document that had, I don't think it was under potential impacts. I think it was, I mean, the whole section had crossed out.
Well, maybe you're just confusing what the red line highlighting looks like. Because it could have been adding stuff.
There's no wholesale taking out of anything by us. The applicant took out a number of sections
Right,
in
that's,
theirs, but that's not what you're looking at here.
right.
And also, there was a couple of times, sometimes it shows up differently in each person's view of the red line. Sometimes when you move a section, like a wholesale section, you take it from here, you cut it, and you paste it up above. Some of them show on the side that all that has been deleted. Other times, like the copy I happen to have, it goes to green and it says it was just moved.
Okay,
Sometimes it shows that it's being deleted and then added. So you have to look at both of them, not just look at the deletion.
There was also a few instances where the applicant has included utilities, information, engineering issues in zoning sections. And I know that my office definitely removed those from zoning sections with the advice that they be added to the utility section. That might be what you're referring to.
oh, okay, I got it.
okay,
Which is what we did, right? You're looking
All right.
at that. Just
All
for the
right, thank
record, can
you.
you say your name
Yes,
and your
I'm
firm?
Malcolm Simpson. I'm the planning consultant. We're doing, I work with H&H and we're doing aesthetics, zoning, and community care.
thank you. So it does talk about the greenhouse gas emissions, and then it does talk about the solid waste. Potential mitigation efforts, again, we went through that,
If I could point out something on potential mitigation measures.
yes, please.
So this is something that the applicant had raised, and it's with respect to 9, 10, 11, and 12, on pages 35 and 36. And they thought that all those should be taken out, 9, 10, 11, and 12. I think it's up to you. I think as to 9, should stay in, except possibly take out wind generation, but that's up to you. I think
Well, geothermal would be the one there, right? If you're talking about potential on-site energy source,
you want to add geothermal and take out wind generation.
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And then 10, it's pretty standard, other than the addition of recirculation of heat produced by lights. That's pretty drastic, but if you want it in, you can keep it in.
I would be okay with removing that last part, but the other stuff is important to me.
And then 11, are you comfortable with 11?
Yes.
Yes,
And 12, I think, should be taken out. It's not a litigation measure, it's just the DEC has a good THC
Good
policy.
advice.
Right, so I think you just take that out. Is that all right?
okay.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to mention.
Thank you.
Then it talks about noise, light, and odor impacts, describes existing conditions. And then the potential impacts of noise, light, and odors. I don't really see anything in there to argue with. Methods to mitigate noise.
Just on the light, there was an addition to what they had, which I thought was an excellent addition. I don't know, I can't recall where it came from. But it's 2E,
Mhm.
discuss light from congregate activities at night. which I think, given the proposed people that are going to be
Right.
populating this, that's probably a very good addition.
Mitigation efforts. Night sky friendly lighting, limitation of foot candles at the boundary.
Are they gonna be, trucking food in?
I can't see that they would be doing that for,
They're not serving, they're not like providing,
There's no.
no, that's not a
dining.
dormer, there's no food service
Yeah.
there.
okay.
Moving down to 3.710, consistency with community plans and community character.
And so you may want to talk about that.
I want to ask you if you would like to come up and speak to that real quickly here.
Just for the board, just to state the obvious, you've read through this and your comments have included in this and you've read the final product as well.
Our initial red line before the public scoping, we thought was largely adequate. We did make some small changes to the language in response to certain community comments that were made. But we do think that it is satisfactory to capture the information needed for the DEIS and certainly set us up in a good position for the FEIS to follow up on any outstanding issues. Are there any questions regarding the community character chapter?
There's one typo that I caught on page 39, the potential impacts. The end of 2, it says the possible relocation of such services to this project instead of other, it should be future projects, not further projects.
Okay, good, because I had a question as to what does this mean instead of other further projects? So that should be future?
Future projects.
Okay.
In other words, what is the qualitative decision-making being done of saying, all right, we're going to give you these services and maybe not have them for other future projects. That was something that was brought up several times. I think Rachel brought it up, and I think several members of the public brought it up.
Right.
Yeah. I'm wondering,
Some reassurance that they're not gonna turn around and say, you know,
This is just asking them to study that. right?
Yeah.
And then when the study comes in, then you can critique that study and determine whether or not it's adequate. It's also a very difficult item to actually study and comment on. But it seemed like it was very important point from you, Rachel, and also from a number of members of the public. Larger issue of we have limited resources, and if we're going to give you these resources, what is that going to do to limiting future projects?
right, or the rest of the community.
You'll be looking at their analysis of that, right? Yeah.
I was thinking of that also in terms of, when you talk about the necessity for recreation, well, they might be providing, you know, a gym or whatever on site, but that's still gonna be, you know, the potential for 700 more people in line to get into the state park. So,
But the issue of recreation,
yes,
related to recreation fees, is that if they're providing a service to just the people in that thing, that
Mhm.
doesn't count at all
okay,
for
good,
the recreation fees and recreation analysis that this board will do. Right, if they were going to provide open fields that everyone in the community could use, you're allowed to take that into consideration as to whether or not they are deserving of some credit for that in the assessment of the fees.
I had one small question about number three, community emergency services. It says it's going to study the average response time to the site. I just want to know that they are going to be studying the the new location of the firehouse, since it was moving to North Corners, in probably the next 6 months or so. Like, when that study is done, I think it should be using that
That'd be
new
very good.
location.
Addition and be very good specific to add to the scope. Because it's very likely that by the time this development comes online, that
Yes.
will have moved, right?
Yeah. So,
Which one is, other than the police department, I think is that already moved or not?
yes, the fire department is going to.
Okay, so it's just really the new fire department, the rescue squad, where is that?
Although, will the police will move into that building as well?
The police are moving into the one next to it.
Oh, okay.
They're on the same.
Yeah, they're like
where's
right next
that?
to each other.
That's a cut,
North Squad.
right?
Yeah, no,
The rescue squad is also on that.
What?
Yeah, their offices are on
Oh,
the street. Yeah, they're all like within
So
similar.
the only one
distance.
that really would be moving is the fire department?
Yeah, so they're moving from here to
Okay,
the.
so we'll say, including the New Falls Fire Department location. Right? Is that adequate?
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, that's, do you mean also in terms of just the increased population, whether they'll need another truck or something?
That would go into this analysis. They would look
Okay.
at the current capacity, the current capabilities of all of the emergency services and factor in, this location and this population. They'll probably also provide letters from the fire chief, the police chief, the rescue squad, giving some kind of comment as to what their current capacity is and whether or not they would be able to serve this development. And then, of course, if there's any specifics regarding the development that require additional equipment, they would mention that in those letters, and that would be required information.
Okay. So we covered that one fairly well. Then it moves down to the potential mitigation measures. Discussing appropriate mitigation measures for the change in population. Positive and negative effects of induced growth. Community character resulting provision of water and sewer. Community emergency services, character, and then plans. That covers that area. Then on to land use and zoning. They're going to, I think, the affordable housing chapter of the Village New Paltz Code, a discussion of that and the impacts. How the proposed action does or does not comply with the affordable housing chapter of the Village Code. That's something that you had been questioning, Rachel.
Yes.
Moving on to fiscal impacts. I think they cover that fairly well. Because there's going to be a lot of questions about the tax revenue for the jurisdiction, impacts to operation and maintenance costs for road maintenance. Moving down to the project alternatives, and this is an interesting one. It talks about alternatives. One is no action. One of the alternatives is to reconfigure the layout. It could reduce or maintain the unit count, but would focus on providing a more localized configuration with smaller footprint that strategically avoids ecologically sensitive areas and minimizes impervious surfaces. It also talks about discussion of alternative sites. and then any sort of alternative analysis.
But just so that you're aware, these last things, project alternatives are mandated by the secret regulations to be included in the DEIS.
Okay.
In a practical sense, I think they have little impact for most projects. The no action alternative simply gives you a baseline to sort of say, well, if nothing happens, this would be the impact. Necessarily think it's very helpful, but it's required to begin with, so they have to do it. Layout reconfiguration is something that certainly is apt here and can be explored. The discussion of alternate sites, that really only has importance when you're dealing with a municipality that is, whose project is being studied. Because the municipality can choose any site they want because they have power of eminent domain. But here, they've chosen this site, and you can't really say, well, I want you to purchase some other site.
Right.
So
Right.
it has limited
Value.
important value with respect to a private project like this. But they're required to study it, and so they're going to study it. And use it for whatever it's worth.
In looking at project site design, the gentleman, Harvey Gregory, who sent the note in today, was requesting for them to do an analysis on whether they could actually create a road that would cut across the property across Route 32, leading to North Platte. Would that be something that?
Wait, that's not even on the property.
Yeah.
North Platte in the
but-
other
but-
direction.
Something off the property that would require the purchase and the agreement of that person's property.
There's a farm there now. There's a
And
farm stand
There's
there.
also a principle in law that for planning boards that you can't mandate that somebody do an off-site improvement that will generally benefit the community. That's illegal, considered potentially attacking a taking. So you really don't have the ability to tell them, go build a road on somebody else's property.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that we address that, and so that does address the
Or through
question
the
they have.
campus, because where he was suggesting putting a road through campus, that would go like, I can't even see how you would put a road there at all.
And you are,
It's
you know,
right through the wetland, it's right, it would go right, the athletic fields are there. I mean, it's not even.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work at all. I
well, I
mean,
mean,
they could connect to the police station, campus police station parking lot. I guess.
you solicit comments from the public, and then it's up to this board to say, well, that's not something we want to study, that's not something we can study.
Right.
You've done your job.
Okay, so looking at adverse environmental impacts, which cannot be avoided if the project is implemented, and it talks about summary of the impacts. Then we go into certain items such as irreversible, irretrievable commitment of resources, cumulative impacts, and on down through such as concerns impacts determined to be irrelevant or insignificant, according to the seeker, the lead agency, which is also responsible for eliminating consideration of those impacts, concerns that have been identified during the scoping process that are determined to be irrelevant or insignificant either because they are not legally relevant to the environmental review, or they're not environmentally significant, or they have been adequately addressed. Then it talks about the information that's going to be included in the appendix. And again, this appendix will have a lot of the data which you and Mr. Holt will have garnered and gathered, so that we can look at that. It's a good reference. And then it finally gets down to the public inspection, and we get to the very end of the document. So with that in mind, then our next step would be to let's see, next step would then be for us to look at whether we believe this document is comprehensive enough to be approved as the final scoping document. And
The only thing, John, just sorry to interrupt, but I
Sure.
think that before you get to that conclusion, which is something you probably should be trying to taking the time to go through the kind of thing, is ask the applicant if they're present virtually, if they have any comments for you to consider before you take their final step.
good point. So let's see, we have Mr. Laporte and we have Tom George. Are you both still with us?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, so is Mike Moriello.
Mike, any comments on the review of this document? Anything that you feel we should need to know that was not included in the discussion we just had?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike speaking. No, I think I agreed with all of the comments that you had and all the red lines that Rick had, and taking out Telefaro Farms, I did agree with that too. But as far as from a legal standpoint, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a very comprehensive document, and a lot of time and effort went into it by the planning board and by Rick too, to make it even a better document than what we had initially submitted. I'll let Tom or Chris add anything they want, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah, we're fine with it as well. We agree.
Agreed.
Okay. So we've gathered a lot of information here. We've sifted through it and discussed it in as much detail as I can remember us doing with any document experience. So we understand what the document is, and then we do understand how it will be used. This will be their guidance for creating the draft environmental impact statement. So with that in mind, then I'd like to ask for a motion to accept this draft document as the final scoping document.
So moved.
Second,
I second.
any discussion? The hesitation there.
Yeah, I mean, I do wish that this final document could have been discussed a little more with the public, or the public could have had more opportunities to read through it. But I understand that opportunity has already passed. That was the public scoping session, and yeah, there will be more chances for them to weigh in. So
Probably the most, first of all, although the applicant has been generous in allowing an extended period of time, the DEC regulations say that you were actually finalize the scope within 60 days from when it was first submitted.
right.
So the DEC, they're putting aside the exact 60 days, the DEC sees this as, we need to move a project along, we can't spend too much time on this. So I think the other thing is that you said, the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement is probably one of the most important milestones there is in the EIS process. You hear the public and experts can chime in. You'll be chiming in, your consultants will be chiming in initially as to whether or not it's responsive to the scope. And secondarily, there may be, even though it's responsive to the scope, you've asked them to study this, and they've studied it, and they've proposed mitigations. But your consultants or yourselves may say, yeah, but that's inadequate. We think that you didn't do a very good job of what we asked you to do. So you can then require them before you accept it, or before you, as your comment to go ahead and say, this is made, et cetera. They then have to go ahead and take that direction in their final environmental impact statement, and they include additional studies and other things. So there are lots of, not lots, but there are several other points that the public can weigh in on. But the public should know that's probably the best opportunity to weigh in on the environmental impact of this project.
Yeah, so I will make it a point to try to get the word out about that when we get to that a
We
little more.
do need to do that. So We do have the motion is proposed. We do have a second. So all in favor? Aye. So this document is approved as the final scoping document. That moves us on to the next point of business. Are there any further public comments that you've registered? None at all online, okay. So then I would like a motion to close the public comments. Second, all in favor? Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just as a matter of process, I will tomorrow finalize the scope with all the, including all the redlining that was done, similar to what the clean copy of that. Plus the modifications that you made tonight. I will send that to Alana for distribution. And also she'll send it on to the applicant as well, and that will become the final.
Do I have to send it all to like the involved and interested agencies and stuff too?
You are required to send it to the involved agencies. And I think if you can send it to most of the interested agencies electronically,
Yeah,
then that's pretty easy to do.
yeah.
Do we need to send hard copies to the involved agencies or just electronic copies again?
No,
The only ones I've noticed that I've had to mail is the Army Corps of Engineers, because I have not been able to get in touch with anybody there, so I've been hard mailing that, but everyone else I have emails for, I think.
Okay.
I'd like to know when they respond.
They never respond to anything I send them, I've never communicated, I even tried, I just like Googled around their number, and I tried calling and left a message, and I never heard anything, so. They don't like to be bothered.
I got the permitting process and they, all that,
Yeah,
and other than that, I mean, you can imagine, they
Yeah.
get probably hundreds of these every single day.
Yeah.
If not thousands, if you talk about national, it's thousands.
So we do need to make a concerted effort to get community input, and Zach, if you would work with Alana on that, I would greatly appreciate it, so that we can try to get as much information out. You have your resources as well to people that are interested, and we try to get as much participation as possible so that it is a process, and the environmental impact statement is something that the community is well aware of, and we'll have the opportunity to review and to offer input, which will be important to the process. So please do that if you would.
Yeah.
So the very last item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So moved.
Thank you.
And a second,
Thank you.
all in favor?
Aye.
So the meeting is adjourned. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it, and good night. Lana, you can close off the.
Good night, thank you.
Good night, Tom.
so do you wanna make are we gonna talk, are we gonna be remote next time?
So yeah, just between us all here,